Muy buenas tardes, continuamos con esta segunda jornada de trabajo acá en el Centro de Convenciones Cartagena de Indias. Nos vamos en este momento con la reunión paralela número 11, incentivos para impulsar inversiones resilientes. Importante tema porque se trata de esos incentivos que van para garantizar la protección de aquellas personas que se pueden encontrar en zonas de riesgo, pero también es cómo conseguir la inversión, cómo fomentar que los estados se interesen en la gestión del riesgo. Allí se encuentra Samuel Lancheros con toda la información y de qué se trata este foro. Adelante.
Muy buenas tardes, continuamos.
Good afternoon. We now continue with the second day of the sixth regional platform for the reduction of risk, management of disasters, and we are going to have 11 session on the first session. It's focused on the construction of institutional capacities to welcome methodologies. We welcome everyone in the streaming of the institutional channel to continue with our session. We are going to introduce our attendees. The moderator of our sessions is Mr. Zunuaga, is the manager of Latin American Bank. Tulio Martinez, Director of Investment of Planning and Economic Policies, Mideplan, from Costa Rica, and President of the National Network of Investment. Also, we have Carolina Diaz Giraldo, Disaster and Climate Change Management Director, and Gilberto Romero Ceballos, who is a specialist on risk management and adaptation to climate change. With no further ado, I give the floor to Jesus Oriaga Marcano, our moderator, for the first segment. Good afternoon again. It's a pleasure for us to be here, to join you and to moderate this session. I appreciate the participation of every one of you, especially of our panel presenters. I'd like to start elaborating on the introduction. This is going to be a first segment that it will be focused on priority 3 of the Sendai framework, that is to invest on risk management for resilience, moving towards approaches on risk reduction and public investment, on private investment and financial elements, on the risk transfer for adaptation of disasters with successful models. We will have a second segment later on that will focus on financial element for risk management and financing disaster recovery. We will move forward the end of the afternoon dimensions that respond to 4 structural elements of Sinai framework. We will be working on different dimensions of 3 alternatives for the build-up of institutional capacities and development of local policies for risk management on public investment. I'd like to invite Carolina Diaz Giraldo, Director of GRD and CSC of the National Planning Department, that initially will make a presentation about the Risk Management Municipality Index, and then we will have a discussion where we will see the initiatives that Mr. Gilberto Romero Ceballos, President of the Prevention Disaster Center of Peru, will discuss about the experience in Peru of the implementation of the Geopolis program and strengthening of the Pijines approach, and Mr. Francisco Tula Martinez, who is the director of the Planning Department and Economic Policy, who will present the Costa Rica experience on incorporating risk investment on financial management. Carolina will start her presentation, and then later on, Gilberto. Carolina will start her presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. Jesus, thank you very much for your kind introduction. I'd like to take advantage of the opportunity to thank the UN platform and the group organizing the risk reduction, and I'd like to thank to my panel colleagues to make this reflection on public investment on risk management. We know that both loss and damages of disasters in Colombia and Latin America and Caribbean area at the end of the day demonstrate that disasters are built up due to a number of decisions from the past. Both Colombia and the rest of the countries, we realize from the history is that events, hydrometeorological events are massive. And if we analyze the last 20 years, 88% of those elements are related to hydrometeorological events. You can see a peak at the end of 2012, and that peak, it doesn't respond so much to the exposure, but an improvement, systematic improvement of the records in the country. But we start asking ourselves, okay, disasters happen, they generate damages and losses, that's evident. The question is then, where are we concentrating that type of impacts and losses? When we collect the information on the affected population versus incomes, and we analyze GDP, and we cross with reference of a population affected, and we use that to adjust with capita. There is an ingredient that says the provinces with less per GDP has the highest impact, and you can see the figures here. In Colombia, many years ago, there's been different efforts to face this type of issues, and one is through the investment on risk management. First thing we have to recognize, between 2010 and 2016, we've tripled the amount of money before 2009. That's progress on the efforts of the country, but if we try to analyze more finely, identifying where investments go, who is making the investments, you see a peak of the efforts, especially a national government, and then the investments from the municipalities. The question then about this is these type of investments, how are they distributed? How are you making priorities on the territory? Because when you see the peaks of investment, there is two coincidences. 2012, there is floods due to La Nina, and another lower peak in 2015, 2016 is the impact of drought due to El Nino impact. So what I want to show here is, attention, the public investment policies and the private could be just two disasters that have already happened. So trying to answer what is the orienting criteria that orients the investment, we put together an exercise to build the risk index from different experiences, 108 risk indexes. We start to see how different scopes and different indexes. One local, that it's with complex approaches, analyzing main ingredients, and some other indexes good to measure perception and a neighborhood level. And there is something intermediate. We'd like to use an index that analyze between regions and municipalities, very simple one with few variables. This made us to build this tool to measure risk at city level. When we have hydrometeorological events and measures only the capabilities of each of the territories to manage. This index is actually very simple, replicable, easy to understand and interpret, and it has a characteristic. It recognizes communities and capabilities. It orients priorities of public policies. And this first exercise focused on hydrometeorological indexes, and it has two components: risks and capabilities that I'm going to present them quickly. The results in terms of threats, after we run the information, the three types, mass movements, floods, and the floods, we have about 17% of the territory it's in critical condition. We have 10 million hectares are flooded periodically. There are 900,000 that are inundated through the Niña phenomenon, and 11.7 millions of hectares that have mass movements, and 12.4 millions could have torrential flows. They are the same space, and it tells us 513 municipalities, more than 15%, have the three critical conditions. In terms of exposure, 80 million people are located in these critical areas, and 61% live in dense populated areas, and Bogotá, Medellín, Putumayo, Caquetá, Baupés, Amazonia. And vulnerability-wise, there are many ways to measure this vulnerability measurement, but there is population that is vulnerable in routine conditions. It would be much more if they face disasters. So we got the multidimensional poverty index, considering that the dimensions reflect which are the limitations those households have and the possibilities for them to mobilize and to have access to the assets. At the end, the index is showing that 429 municipalities have very critical vulnerability conditions. Mostly we have no sewage, no water, we have educational lag, and a number of other conditions. This brings us to the construction of the risk index, and it's two indexes. It's exposure to threat, population, vulnerability, total population. 6.7 million, 13% of the population is vulnerable and is exposed to critical threats in hydrometeorological terms.
Can be shown special with the next studies will show who has the greatest degree of risk and you can see it. Now we're going to see the component of capabilities. Considering that the risk conditions are heterogeneous, the capabilities that each territory has to respond to the situation. That's why we use through three different variables how we measure the capabilities of the territorial institutions with this. So we're going to see the tax and non-taxable incorporate that risk level for the development, evaluate the technical capabilities of what people are doing on the national level by reading that not everybody has the same capabilities and help the municipalities to progress in the task and see how they can develop their technical capabilities to be able to manage the project. But this also allows us to make a forecast of the municipalities. We have some municipalities that have very good capability but are facing very critical situations. So maybe when we can tell them that they have to commit themselves to certain specific goals and see what capability they have to reduce the risk and how we can guarantee the management of the risk to be able to make a financial assessment and see how the investments that we make are working for the objectives. There are some municipalities that do not have the capabilities of of checking their finances and managing their investments. So we have, for now, that's everything. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Carolina. Now, Gilberto will speak about the experience in Peru, about the implementation of indexes and management, strengthening of management. We have developed this in CAD through Geopolis. But before that, I would like to make a small introduction to the topic, the institutional strengthening indexes are part of the institutional strengthening of the Geopolis program. These unite several elements, among them the regulation of the country regarding risk and sectorial levels. This is focused on the sectorial planning and covers several dimensions. Another one of those is the political and technical commitment that the institutions of the sector have in the institutional organization, the use of the information, how this is organized in the institutions. And this component is joined with a physical engineering component in which we have developed studies in the area of engineering for topics of infrastructure. In the case, we have made an evaluation of bridges that has experienced several impacts due to evaluate the performance and how we can improve this with construction that are against earthquakes to be able to improve their useful life or study why they failed. Also studies regarding threats that have to do with the importance of the study to be able to incorporate in a better manner an implementation of the projects to avoid the impacts of the effects of earthquakes, the use of isolators and energy energy strengthening that we have not implemented in our region, but that several countries have worked on that. And guaranteeing the functionality of the system after an earthquake, because they have used this methodology. We have evaluated the regulations of earthquakes in the region, including United States. In the case of institutional strengthening, we have made for the roads and transportation, ports, electricity, energy, logistics. We have made studies in different countries of the region: Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, Bolivia, and the logistics center in Panama. In case of Peru, we work with the Transportation and Telecommunications Ministries, and we establish these programs for both sectors. The Communications Ministry has an instrument that allows them to make sectorial policies that helps to strengthen the communication of the performance. These two sectors, incorporating the management of risks and disasters. Gilberto, tell us how was the experience in Peru, and how that has contributed to the strengthening of the capabilities of the ministries. Okay, thank you. I have to start necessarily in two contexts. One, el fenómeno El Niño. This is that the phenomenon lost Peru and Ecuador. We have 3 El Niño experiences in the last few years. Intense rains that have sludges, muds, flows, and the road infrastructure is the most exposed and the one that experiences the greatest losses and damages, which is very costly for a country to have to permanently repair the roads. Another element that also I want to put in the context is that as of 2011, Peru changed the approach of management of disasters to managing the risk of disasters. Before, we were focused on the disaster and to see how we would prepare to manage it, to administer, and the civil defense were the institutions in charge of the topic. But as of 2011, now the approach is centralized in the risk, to work in the risk so that it will not turn into a disaster. And this goes together with a confirmation that all the actors of development are also generators in a different manner and different types in the risk. So they must manage the risk. So now it's not only one office that manages, but all the institutions have to manage the risk. The approach that comes with the law also indicates that the way of managing the risk is working in transversally with the development through projects, institutions, which are executed later. The analysis risk is mandatory in order to make decisions for the plans for the projects that they want to work on. These are some of the elements of the context. Given the law in 2011 and the mandatory of for the public institutions of implementing this law, we have at that moment we didn't have any methodology of how to work. So we received the request from the Ministry of Transportation that they wanted to implement a new law. There was a political willingness of the ministry minister at those moment, and he contacted the CAF to support him in this type of tasks. We constituted a team to give the technical assistance that the ministry needed. And we started to identify, to design the way that this task must be carried out within a sector. In this case, the transportation sector. We did the same with the communication sector later on. We carried out a study of the regulations that govern the sector in the for the different institutions and the role that each one would play. And we also carried out a study of how they already had some elements, and they had some technical regulations in some way. This allowed us to define what are the key elements in these institutions with which we have to work in order to achieve the purpose. The purpose was to incorporate the risk management in a transversal manner in all the institutions. Okay, the methodology is called the FIL, Indicative Plan of Management for the Disaster. This is an indicative plan, and it has a set of actions that would have to be developed by the sector to be able to achieve the purpose of integrating the risk management. It doesn't come accompanied by schedules, by specific tasks, or by the resources necessary for its implementation. But it does give the guidelines, the path to follow to implement the risk management in a correct manner. We initiated a process then, a participant project, giving the fact that in accordance to the law, every public institution have to establish a team to manage the risk, and this is headed by the highest management in the sector. And this is vice ministers, directors of institutions, and it's all the top management of all the public institutions. This team is the working team for risk management according to the law. In the case of the Ministry of Transportation, it's about 17 institutions that had to name their general directors, but it was also necessary, additional to that, that the technicians of each institutions also comprise a group of technicians that would help the work of the directors. The work team of top management work team meets every 6 months, but the technicians have to meet as much as they need. So the technical group we have used them to carry out the work in a participant manner. Through some workshops, they were trained, they were presented with the topics, with the agenda, and the topics that each technician should cover. They were giving a specific training according to the regulation. There was a series of instances that work in the regulation. There are others that worked in planning and budgets and projects and public investment, and there are others that implement the projects. In the Peruvian case, where we have some national institutions, provias, that work in the territory, and we have a situation that is concessions, because in the country, the main roads that the country has are under concession to a private sector. 90-something% are under private concession of roads. They also had to participate the road concession institution in this process. Then the training was an element that had to be repeated several times during this implementation, during the implementation of this methodology, because there's a lot of change of personnel. When the minister changes or the vice minister changes, then they usually change also their team. So this is recurrent. Sometimes they don't even are in their position for 1 year. So they had to be retrained. So the final result, what does this indicate? It indicates that the first thing that should be updated in a sector should be to update the sectorial policy, because if the policy doesn't even mention the risk management with their guidelines, then it is impossible for anybody to comply anything, because that's the basic path of the sector. Second, we had to include this in the planning processes of the sector. In the Peruvian case, there's a series of plans that are being carried out within the sector. There are sectorial plans, there's institutional plans, there's also annual plans, logistic plans, a series of plans that the sector has to be able to carry out their work. So the planning, incorporating the risk manager, reviewing the plans, authorizing the plans for risk management is a second line of work that is proposed through this instrument. Then it was necessary also to update and adequate the organizational structure to carry out their work, because if the regulation does not indicate that this is part of the directorate to carry out a risk management, then it will not happen. So this has to be formalized through this mechanism. Also, a sector has specific technical standards of how to carry out your work. There's technical standards for the construction of bridges, of roads, for the operational maintenance of the roads that could be every day, or it could be on different levels. In each one of them, there are technical standards that have to be complied, and they should consider the risks. We propose that we have to identify the roads in the road inventory, the risks that are in the territory and that could impact the whole road. The whole roads. It is also identified that the information systems in the sector are very old, and they're individual. It was necessary to update them and to join them. Everybody had a lot of information, but that information did not talk among them. So we when maps were made, the maps were old, and they did not show the critical points that are destroyed in each rain season. This was not incorporated, this was not updated, so we proposed to update and integrate all the systems, and also to become part of the information systems that are handled by the government institutions, so in order to be able to review the risk that they faced. Another element that also would help to guarantee that the topic had a relatively continuity is the training of a specialized person specialized in the management of risk in each area of the sector. In the planning area, in the formulation of project area for public investment projects. So this type of things are some of the things that we propose through a strengthening plan. I think that I am going to stop here. Thank you so much. This is key. Once you have the capacity of being able to formulate adequate plans and projects, this means you can take this to the public investment plans. I want Francisco to tell me how you do this in Costa Rica. How's your experience as director? Thank you so much for the opportunity of being able to tell you a little bit about the experience in Costa Rica. I'm sorry to tell you my throat is not behaving too well, and I'm trying to give you the message as quickly and as clearly as possible. Based on your question and what I have heard my colleagues mention, I would like to define the main items that we have addressed in Costa Rica for the risk management, and I am going to tell you about 4 big topics. The first one is a reflection that I want to tell you about the topic. Second is how we have incorporated the topic of risk management in public investment. And the third one is that has to do with the vision or the addressing of how we have addressed these topics. And concretely, the fourth is what are we doing at an operational level. And I want to tell you the experience that we have had. The first topic, I think it is important that in forums like this we should be very clear. At least my appreciation is the truth has surpassed the expectations that we had in general in these topics, and I think it is enough to look at the news to see what is going around us. We realize that we are very delayed in addressing the problem. I think that under any context, in any of our countries, in any of the areas, this is the truth. So I think here it is important not only to look at the future, but to expedite our actions so that we can work in the future, and this is important. This reflection is important. The second point is why the risk management for disaster and public investments. I think that there's very clear signs that we should not forget that we're in several levels and several contexts. In the first instance, we could visualize or identify that there are changes in climate. In the climate, there's increase in temperatures, and that's on the level of disasters. We're seeing and living, experiencing this. But if we're going through other levels, in terms of the behavior of the people and the life in society, we realize that this is generating great losses, great damages, great impacts to human life. And if we go further there to the topics on the financial part, on the economic part, we can see that there's also identify different impacts in terms of infrastructure and investments, in terms of perhaps some variables that some time ago we had not even thought about them. They were not so near this type of phenomenon. So this leads us to think that in the ministries, planning, economy, finance, have thought about the need of looking at this phenomena with a different point of view. At the end of the day, all this is not less than a problem of development, a problem of affectation to the life in society. And I think that within the context, we have to have very clear all the interrelationships and have an ample criteria, and to be able to take it to this context. Is this type of situations that we have been experiencing in the last years in societies in general, in Costa Rica specifically, that have led us to address the topic under a different point of view. The addressing that we have done is like systemic. We have very clear that it is not that institution is not only the work of a sector of the society, and the experience tells us that in Costa Rica the approach that we have used is from the interinstitutional, intersectorial, with the participation of a lot of people. But I would like to rescue three of them because of what they mean within the context. The planning that has to do with investment, that has to do with the national development, all the planning that we have, the part of public finances. Most of the cases that they assume the cost of the actions that we do or do not do, and also specialized institutions in the handling of risk managers. In the case of Costa Rica, the emergency directorate that has some mandate and who were in the plenary sessions before should know, because we had experience. This added to the fact that there is a strong institutionality in Costa Rica. There is some important regulations that allows us as articulations. There is the foundation on which we
this issue from the systemic perspective. That would be, on a first approach, the way we've addressed that. What have we done specifically from the management perspective? What I'd like to share with you, the way we do it, the operation. I would present 4 elements that we've developed these topics. It's the regulation, a strong regulation, align and articulated, that forces institutions, particularly, is not exclusive on public investment, but on public investment, it's mandatory to include these topics, not only on projects of public investment, but in public investment in general, and the national system of public investment on a second stage in Costa Rica, after 40 years of being neglected, involves or incorporates strong regulations that require and is mandatory for the institutions to include it. And the second item is the build-up and construction of knowledge, not only from the perspective of a managing ministry, but from the perspective of holistic or comprehensive research institutes. This is another aspect we've been built up, and I think it could be replicated in most countries with a particular feature. I think we've understood it like that, is that the information as such is not enough. We have to systematize it. We have to make it orderly. We have to make it accessible to the users. And a third topic, I think the most relevant and the one that is addressed more, has to do with the instruments. We need methodology, planning, instruments. Here, on methodology instruments, we've developed approaches and specific methodologies, specific and general, with a single feature that has included risk reduction for disasters in the public investment, national plan for investment, risk management on public investment, specific plans that involves this management comprehensively, and it has allowed us to generate not only the possibilities and the knowledge and instruments to do it, but also we've realized that the important element is to transfer this knowledge, to train the users and entities and individuals, and this was the fourth item. The last one is, last but not least, has to do with the communication of these topics to the different actors, role players. This is very briefly. I think I ran out of time, but this is the vision and the foundations, how we've approached these topics. Thank you very much for sharing your experience. Carolina, the importance of this type of instruments beyond the governments and ensuring, let's say, that they could be used, that they won't be obsolete. It's relevant for building up a baseline and to being able to keep monitoring throughout the time and reach risk management at local levels. Do you have any recommendations on the implementation to keep these instruments up to date and to ensure that they could be kept, maintained, and to keep complying with the mission they were designed and the learned lessons? Yes, of course, Jesus. First, we would have to consider each of the territorial entities, not only here in Colombia, but all countries have vulnerabilities, and they have agencies to prevent, to correct, or mitigate impacts. But measurements, but policies from which you set priorities and you orient important investments on territories depend on a number of things. And there are restrictions on availability of information, the scale, temporality, the levels, and you start finding bottlenecks and hurdles that at the end of the day you say, okay, I need a tool, simple, replicable, easy to interpret, to facilitate decision makers, both locally and nationally, where I can have resources that could be cost effectively invested. So this is one of the advantages of this index, because we use census information that is produced by the technical, scientific, recognized entities, and that's open data information. And initial municipal index you can access on the web page. They have the formulated basis, you got the geo reference, you have the spreadsheets and Excel sheets. You can replicate it anywhere else in the world, and that's the purpose, for it to be used and replicated by any other entity, and you can adapt it. That could, from the beginning, ensure sustainability throughout the time. But just closing as a recommendation is the importance of those decisions we make of investments in terms of public policies cannot be seen from risk reduction of disasters. Risk reduction is a development issue. Every dollar we invest in development had to be articulated to environmental management, to land use, climate change, development policies. Yes, we are making risk management efforts, but the actors, the role players, are making decisions that are generating risks. So provided we don't have a holistic approach for risk management, forward development, those investments won't achieve cost effectiveness. Thank you very much. Gilberto, from your experience in Peru, can you mention, please, how have you managed to materialize on a transportation ministry and communications, the use of tools strengthening capabilities within the structure of the sectors in Peru? We've made progress on this topic, on the plans sectors, multi-sector, multi-year. We've incorporated the strategic plan of the sector. Also on the institutional strategic plan, this sector has been implementing a methodology to incorporate risk analysis on their structure. So risk is to highlight Peru is pioneer on design of guidelines for a methodology to include risk analysis on public investment. We publish the policy and all the projects are mandated to formulate risk analysis per law. That was before risk management law was passed in 2011. Nevertheless, each sector knows better the vulnerabilities and they are invited to develop their own methodology customized to their service for the design, for the analysis of their own context. It cannot be a general methodology. It has to be specific. It's not the same how rains affect health sector or education to the impact on transportation, frost and snow, how they affect the roads and transportation versus health of the community. In that sense, there are we've made some progress, and also on the modernization on the IT system for the ministry, there is a qualitative leap on that matter, and there is also a base that can be there is a progress on risk scenarios on as the foundation for the formulation of plans and public investment projects. This is a much larger project, and it requires technical assistance, and we are developing. The progress, I think, from my perspective, is relative and not much. It's kind of short. One of the sectors that influence is political willingness. A minister could be highly interested, but the coming minister might be completely ignorant on the matter, is not excited about it, brings other priorities to the table, and there is a drop on the progress on that item. Then the major challenge we face is how to ensure continuity of the processes. I think that's a topic of reflection for everyone, because from the political perspective there is this situation. Another element we need to address here is risk management requires specialization, especially on risk analysis. It's not something that can be done generally, because when you define scenarios, it's something you find is highly specialized and it has a major relevance because it demands a number of actions that responsibility of the formulators of scenarios and define risk areas or vulnerable areas where you need to mitigate risk. This is what we are living after the coastal El Niño phenomenon, because the major responsibility of identifying risk areas that are that have no mitigation. This is highly arguable. Nevertheless, the government has established targets and tasks for identification of areas with no mitigation. Populations have to be evacuated, and you cannot build there anymore. Everything depends on how much you want to invest. If you have heaps of money, you just protect what you want. But if you don't have any money at all, if there is no political willingness on investment on certain items, then that risk cannot be mitigated. Thank you. To close, Francisco, something short. The additional message to your presentation, something you'd like to highlight from your presentation. Basically, referring to, we have commented on the second part of the panel on potentialities to discuss. We have to take advantage of the moment. If we present as methodologies, programs, projects due to the moment, no one is going to say no. So we have to present and seize the opportunity to create opportunities and design a number of tools that allow the instrumentalization of the topic. In general, societies have developed a number of inputs to develop here. We don't need to start from scratch. We need to take advantage of the technology, resources, knowledge, capabilities available, and these give us a doable context to being able to make progress. Remember that we've made slow progress. We need to close the gap and improve the capability of making progress. We need to work together, taking advantage of the potentialities of the different branches of knowledge and expertise, and to be able to implement it not only on public investment but on general society development. Thank you very much to you too. Congratulations to the National Department for the launching of this index. I'd like to invite you to continue with the second session. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this parallel session number 11. I'd like to make some notes for all the guests. This session number 11 will be linked to session 14. This comes. We have three main components I'd like to share. The first session we had is to set priorities of having adequate management items. The second part, we are going to continue now that all these plans requires international funds. Next, World Bank, CECAF, and the next panelists are going to present how to manage these funds. And the next ones have to do with public sector. Representatives of Peru, Ecuador, Mexico, and Chile will present how they see this on planning and managing. We are going to be the next 40 minutes on the instruments for risk. So I welcome. Thank you very much. We'll continue our second segment of this 11th plenary. It's incentives to have resilient situations. Alberto Underraga is an economist and a Chilean politician that was public works minister for 4 years during Michelle Bachelet's presidency. Likewise, we have three presenters. One of them, Legia Castro de Doens, is corporate director of environment of CAF of the American Bank. Ruben Hoffman is the president of American Lighting, strengthening for local and national efforts. And Miguel Ángel Villalobos, vice president of World Bank Finance, Competitiveness and Innovation Financing for Risk Reduction and Service. With no further ado, I welcome Alberto Undurraga.
Good afternoon to everybody. I want to invite Legia immediately so that we can save time. This is, I invite Jose Angel also and Ruben up here so that we can hear the presentation and participate in that. Good afternoon. My respect to the colleagues of the first panel was very good. I enjoyed it very much. Excellent. I have a very short presentation to make some reflections that are addressed to how to improve the financing that is required for this the after effect, the attention of the disaster. In this, I wanted to highlight here that for 2012, we are going to have in Latin America, for example, 62,000 million of costs due to disasters. I mention this because only last year the losses that the insurance company had due to extreme events that occurred, climatic events that occurred for American Latin, was more than $100,000 million. For United States, 306 million. 1,000 million billions. A lot of insurance company had to work with this aspect, and they face difficult financial situations. But we do not talk about the cost of the public sector. We have the cost of the disaster when it occurs, but not of the consequences that the society faces after that. Generally, the costs that we talk about are the cost of the losses of infrastructure. But for example, in the event of El Niño in 97, 98, that was very severe, very extreme. In the case of Panama, that was a drought of more than 5 months with high temperatures, where the ecosystems of the central system of Panama experience extreme stress. When the first rains started, we have epidemic. We never thought that we had an epidemic like that in Panama, and Latin America only faced this in the south part. The ecosystems, the natural depth of rats, an epidemic of rats, the stress of the ecosystems due to this heat, such a high heat and the drought. And then we experienced with the first rains epidemic of rats that had a huge cost to control them. People were dying, and the health system was not prepared to attend this type of epidemics. After more than 100 people were dead, even North American tourists that came to then that's when we had the help, because people from the United States came to see what was happening. The cost of controlling the epidemic did not include to the cost of that consequences of the disaster, but it was a cost that we had to to cover. Usually we do not add the public and private cost. We do not have in this country real costs of the losses associated to extreme events, or they are dispersed in the public and private sectors. Here, as my colleagues mentioned in the previous session, in the last few years we have been starting to strengthen the work of identifying the risk, the financing, to have a strategy to be able to cover all the covers and to prepare ourselves to face it. We have continued working in the reconstruction, but we need to improve the information of cost in order to be able to know what are the needs that we have and what real financing we need, like for the previous phase, which is the identification, and the post phase, which is the management of the disaster. Here we have an advance in the management of post. But when we initiated to working on the prevention, we still had a margin that we need to have to see examples like the Mexican presenter show us. We need more investment to prepare ourselves for previous phases. I would also like to mention here the example from Chile of how initially the addressing of the strengthening of the infrastructure in Chile to modernize it, to strengthen the institutionality. They did not take in consideration the climate change. And after 26 disasters, of which 6 were due to climate change, they became aware of this, and they started working, and they had a national plan to investigate and to work in an infrastructure. But though all this was born with national budget, to be able to have the cost allows us to become aware in the public management, the government plans, our investment plans, every year, and include the cost that is required to implement or generate new policies, new legislation, new regulation, national plans to work on the previous phase where we have to initiate and strengthen. After you have the cost very well clarified, you know what you have to invest, what you can cover in the company. When they become aware of the climate changes, they can decide what they need from other investment funds which exist to be able to complete the budget that you need, that you don't not depending on a foreign institution, or we have to incorporate in our annual investment plan of our countries. Here, what I would like to show you or mention, I love the previous panel because easily each one of them explain the experience that they have had in different countries, of how they have associated the risk and the vulnerability with the climate change. It is not always clear how they go together. If you identify the areas of risk in other countries, it will allow us to learn better how the vulnerability of the communities is there, and This will allow us to work in the adaptation of the vulnerabilities. Generally, we have worked in our countries more in the risk management, and now we are starting to work in the adaptation to climate change. But we must complement what we are doing in both areas. We have to join them, not only to coordinate them, but also to make national plans in such a manner that we can optimize what we are doing. That was the general reflections and presentation that I wanted to make before we started this panel. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ligia. I would like to start by the question from the experts of the World Bank in this matter. The risk disaster management that we have seen, we would like to see what are the bases for the financing. We don't know when the events are going to occur and what will be the magnitude. Before I answer, I don't know if it's possible to put the slides that I have. Okay, first of all, the financial management for disaster is simply a part, or should be seen as a comprehensive plan of the risk management. It doesn't make any sense from the financial point of view that it is feasible on the long term if you have not carried out the task of modifying the risk to make it less vulnerable. We're talking about seismic codes, construction codes. After you carry it out, then it makes sense to talk about the financial part. With respect to the system that we do not know when disaster is going to occur, and if it occurs, what is the severity of the damage that is going to cause? That means that we have to base ourselves in probabilistic numbers. So we have to understand that we really do not know when something is going to happen, when a flood is going to occur. So in the financial part, in the risk, the management of disasters is based on the probabilistic evaluation and the evaluation of the risk. Based on that, that's how we can make an insurance of the catastrophic risk. Sometimes the state becomes the last instance insurance. Sometimes without thinking, it's just that they have to act, for example, in social interest of people with poor people that have a high degree of probability. So, going back to the topic of the basis, there are two principles that we have to consider. One is the frequency and the severity of the events. This is a probabilistic law that was discovered, I saw it, in the Industrial Revolution. Basically, there's a lot of events that are very frequent, but that have very low impact. Rains that you experience every year, but there's several events that occur very few times, but when they occur, generate large damages. Also, when in a certain period of time in a year, there are several events that could be greater than the addition of only one event. Why is it important to identify these risks? Because this gives us an idea what instruments could be used to determine or establish the layers. For example, the first layer is damages that are frequent but are very low. You could not measure them with any instrument because that would be just throwing the money away. That should be monitored through calamities. There's an intermediate layer in which we could think about some emergency loans that are not the best because generally the people that loan the money react and the interests are very high and they're all the other ones is the ones, the budgetary financing, which also depends on what period of the year the event occurs. And lastly, the last phase are huge events or catastrophic events. We recommend that there's a evaluation of the risk. Catastrophic events, by definition, is a systemic event. So the best thing that you can do is to take it out of the system and protect the system. And protect the system, I'm talking about the fiscal layer and the economy area. We have catastrophic bonuses and traditional insurance. There's also another things like increase of taxes, domestic credit, external credit that we can make an evaluation of cost benefit, but also we're trying to provide loans. Oh, thank you so much. We have an amount of 62 million, but you said that not all the costs were incorporated, so there's certain synergies in the risk manager that has to do with the climate change. Angel has shown us what has to do with the theoretical framework and how to face this and where the financing goes into all this risk management. What happens with the private sector, Ruben? What was the experience of Mexico? How did Mexico process this to involve the private sector? Yes, thank you so much. I think that we have to start from the fact of how we initiate, how is the evolution towards the private sector. In 1996, Mexico creates the Natural Disasters Fund. Is a fund for resources that was used when there was a disaster. This was managed by the Ministry of Finance. After a certain time, we realized that a budgetary fund, it could be a lot of money because there was no disasters, but another year, then if they had any natural disaster, it was not enough. From there, then we made the decision of trying to change the budget of the country to assign something from the budget of so at the end of the year, what was left had not to be reintegrated or returned to the government, because you know that if you don't expect